Alrighty. Okay, so yesterday we talked about, not yesterday, Wednesday, we started talking about relative frequency tables. Okay, so we looked at these and we noticed that they are very similar to what we learned about two-way tables, and two-way tables are just where the two categories, we have the columns and we have the rows. The only difference was they were in percentages, right? Okay. And
pardon this interruption. Just a note about the club pictures this morning.
So I don't know how much we talked about this on Wednesday, but I did start talking about it with some of my other classes later on. So I'm just gonna go over it one more time. Before we can understand how to create a relative frequency table, it's supposed to be table. A relative frequency table is we have to know how to create a percentage. Okay, we have to know how to make them. So real quick, let's talk about what do we know about percentages? How do we get percentages? What are they? Okay, it's like an average of a group of numbers. Okay, so one that we all should be familiar with is our grade, right? So we take a test or we do an assignment. How do we get a percentage grade from that? How is it created? Okay, you add up all of what? I'm just thinking of one individual assignment. So like you took a test. How do you get your test score? Okay, you take how many you got correct. Okay, so we'd add all those up, and that's the part that you got correct. And then you take that number and you divide it by how many questions there were, right? So the total amount of questions. So a percentage is just a part of a whole. It's just like a fraction. Okay. So if we were taking a test and you've got there were 25 questions and you got 18 of them correct. So you got 18 out of the 25 and you have this fraction. How would we find its percentage? What? Yeah, we just divide them. 18 divided by 25 and we get 0.72. So what percentage would you have? 72%. Okay, so that's what we're going to get into. And trust me, by the end of this next activity, you're going to be able to pick up on that a lot easier. Okay, so moving on, we talked about city cats and country cats. So we said we were interviewing 200 people total, and they asked if they prefer dogs or cats or rural or urban setting. The actual values, underline actual values collected from the survey are in this first table. Okay, so we talked about, we see our two categories here going both ways. They even added the totals in there for us, okay, which is very helpful.
The following students need to report to the high school office: Cameron Cox, Mason Burris, Hunter Montgomery, Grant Suttles, Jacqueline Stone, Allison Robinson, and Annika Jones. Thank you.
All right. So they've gone ahead and added in all of our totals for us, which is really helpful because we're going to need all of those totals to create a relative frequency table. Okay. So we're going to be referring back to this table a lot. So just keep that in mind. I'm not going to talk too much about it because we're just going to keep referencing it. So going to the next page, it says the next table shows what percentage of the 200 total people. Highlight or underline percentage of the 200 total people included or represented by each combination of categories. The segmented bar graph represents the same information graphically. All right, so look, ignore this bar graph right now. You're not going to need it at this moment. Just focus on the table. All right. Once again, I have this table here. I have my same category, but what do you notice about the information in it now? It's in percentages. Okay, so we have done something to our original two-way table to create this new table. And what they've created here is, write this down, an overall relative frequency table. Remember, we know it's a relative frequency table because it's in percentages, but specifically, it's an overall. And the reason I know it's an overall, I can't tell that just by looking at the percentages of in and of themselves. I know that right here because it told me where I highlighted, because it's out of the total people. So it's out of all of the people overall. Okay. So how did they go from this table to this percentage table? Okay, I'm going to give you a little formula here. What they did was they took the actual amount or the actual value from our two-way table and they divided it by the total people that were surveyed. Okay, an overall relative frequency is something that y'all are most used to seeing, just like we talked about with the test grade. Okay, you take your actual value that you made and you divide it by the total that was offered. Okay, so let's see how that works. Like, what does that actually mean? So we're going to make our own little table. You're gonna have to write small and fit it in right here, but you can do it. So just make a quick little two-way table right under here. Okay, you don't have to have totals in this. All right, so let's try this. We're looking at urban cat. So we want to know how they got 27%. Okay, so in order to get that, we need to take the actual value. So we're going to go back to our original table. What's the actual value of urban cats? 54. Okay, so we're going to put 54 real small in there. Make sure you leave space. All right, and how many total people did we interview or survey? 200. So it's 54 out of the 200 people there. Okay, so we want to know what percentage of the total people there were from the city and had cats. So how are we going to take this fraction and make it into a percentage? We just divide it, okay? So you would just take a calculator, 54 divided by 200. And what do we get? 0.27, which would be 27%. Okay, so let's try the next one. Now we're going to see what percentage of all 200 people were from the city and had dogs. Okay, so we do that by taking the actual value of urban dogs. So let's go back to our table. How many were there? 80. Urban dogs, there were 80. Okay, so 80 out of the how many people? 200. Okay, so I want to know what percentage that is. How am I going to find that? I'm going to divide it. 80 divided by 200 is 0.4. Is that 4%? No, it's 40%. Okay, you take your decimal and you would move it 2 times, which would create a 0. So that's 40%. All right, next we have rural cat. How many rural cats did we have?
96.
That's how many cats we had. How many rural cats? 42. Okay, 42 out of how many? 200. All right, what percentage of cats is that, do you think? I bet it's 21%. All right, and then finally we have rural dogs. How many were there? Rural dogs. 24 out of how many? 200. Okay, so what percentage is that? 12%. Okay, so now that we know how these percentages or what those percentages came from, we can now say we interviewed 200 people. 27% of those people lived in the city with cats. 21% of them lived in the country with cats. 40% lived in the city with dogs, and 12% lived in the country with dogs, which is kind of surprising because I would think people who lived in the country would be more likely to have a dog.
More cats, really, more.
Yeah, they definitely had more cats.
Yeah.
compared to dogs. But now you can see that because we know that percentage and where it came from, we're already starting to interpret the information and just make observations about it, okay? Because we know where it came from, okay? So that is an example of an overall relative frequency table. That is one of the 3 different types of tables, okay? So let's talk about the second one. So go down to the second little section here. Yes, ma'am.
So with that, whenever you divide it, would it ever come out like 1 point something, or would it always say?
If it ever did, it would mean the number in the numerator was larger than the denominator. And in which case, okay, so like if we had 204 out of 200, okay, you would get 1.02, right? You would still move it 2 decimal places, and that would be 102%.
Okay.
So it would just be a larger, and that wouldn't really go with this. That's going to be more into a different part of math. Okay. Next, it says the next table shows the percentage of each column that had a certain pet preference in a column relative frequency table. The segmented bar graph represents the same information graphically. Okay, so once again, this is a column. Write this down, column. I'm gonna abbreviate it, relative frequency table.
Okay, if we can have FFA, Student Council, and National Honor Society members to the gym at this time. FFA, Student Council, and National Honor Society.
I'm recording it, so y'all can just go back for this part. All right, so this is a column relative frequency table. So instead of focusing on the overall amount of people that we interviewed, this time we're just focusing in on our columns, okay? So what are our categories for our columns? Urban and rural. So we're just looking at the totals for those this time, okay? So we're gonna have a new little formula for this. We're gonna take the actual value, and instead of doing it by the entire total, we're gonna do it by the column total. Okay, so you have a little bit more space for this one, but we're going to draw us another little table. Okay, so once again, we are just focusing in on our column. So we're wanting to know based off of all the people from the city or based on all the people from the country, not all the people in general, okay? So we're honing in on something a little bit more specific now. So let's look at it. So we're going back to urban cat. We need to know its actual value. So how many urban cats did we have? 54. So we're going to write 54, but we're not going to make it out of 200. That would just give us the same percentages up here. Notice how all the percentages in this new table are different than the last one. Okay, this is a new table. We want to know it out of the column total. We want to know how out of the urban people asked total. So how many total people were from the city? 134. So this is going to be 54 out of 134. All right, so what percentage of people from the city preferred cats? Well, how are we going to find that? We're going to do 54 divided by 134. We get this really long decimal this time. Same thing though, we just take our decimal and move it twice. So what percentage is that? 40%. Okay, now let's stay in our column, urban dog. How many urban dogs do we have? 80 out of how many? 134. What percentage is that? It's 60%. All right, let's look at our next column. All right, we need the actual value of rural cats. Okay, how many rural cats did we have?
42.
We had 42. Out of how many? 66. Good. It's a different column now. So we have a different amount of country people that we interviewed. So it's out of 66. So what percentage of people is that? 64%. All right. And finally, we have rural dogs. How many rural dogs did we have? 24. Out of how many? 66. So out of the 66 people from the country, what percentage of them liked dogs? 36%. Okay. So you can see how that was more specific. We were just focusing in on the people in the city or just about the people in the country. Okay. Last one. It says the last table shows the percentage of each row that live in a certain area in a row relative frequency table. Row relative frequency table. Okay, so this time we're focusing in specifically to our rows. Okay. All right, so for the overall, we did the actual value by the overall total. By the column, we did the actual value divided by the column total. How do you think we're going to find the percentages for row relative frequency tables? Divided by the row total. We're going to take the actual value and divide it by the row total. Sorry, I have to, all my players are texting me. Okay, so we are going to draw us another little table real quick. All right, so we need to know the actual value of urban cats. How many urban cats do we have? 54. What color is it, baby? 54. Oops. All right, and we want to know based on the row total, based on all the cats, how many total cats did we have? 96. We had 96. All right. So what percentage of all the cats live in the city? 56. Okay, let's stay on this row. Now we have rural cats. How many rural cats did we have? 42 out of how many total cats? 96. So out of all the cats, what percentage of them lived in the country? 44. Okay, next we're looking at our dogs. Okay, so now we have urban dogs. How many actual urban dogs did we have? 80. Okay, so out of all the dogs, 80 of them lived in the city. How many total dogs were there? There were 104. Okay, so we changed our row, so now it has a new row total. Okay, so what percentage of dogs lived in the city? 77. All right, and last one, rural dogs. How many total rural dogs did we have? 24 out of how many total dogs? 104, which is what percentage? 23. Awesome. Okay, so now you can see where we got all of those. So that's us answering number ones. Number one. Oh no, I said ones. Next. Okay, so now that we have these relative frequency tables, now we can kind of hone in and answer very specific questions based on what they're asking. Okay, so I want you to focus on how they are asking the question so we know which graph to use, okay? Because they're not going to say, use a row relative frequency table to answer blah, 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 okay? They're just going to ask it like you would see it in the real world, and you just have to know what table to use, okay? We are on page 16 now. All right, so number 2, it says, what percentage of those surveyed live in an urban area and prefer dogs? Okay, so specifically how they asked it is percentage of those surveyed. Okay, how many people were surveyed? 200 total people. Okay, so if we want to know the percentage based on all of the people, which one of those 3 are we going to use? We're going to use the overall relative frequency table. Okay, so specifically it wants to know what percentage of all the people surveyed live in an urban area and prefer dogs. So we're going to look at the overall table, urban area, and they prefer dogs. What percentage is that? 40%. All right, does that make sense how we got that one?
The overall is the first one, right? The first.
All right, next. Among the people surveyed, who prefer dogs? So among the people surveyed, who prefer dogs? Okay, so now it had a specific preference in this one. All right, so when it gives a specific preference like that, we have to see which category that is coming from. All right, where is the dog shown in our tables? Is it in a column or a row? Okay, right here I see that it's in a row. Okay, so when it asks about a specific preference, you have to see where that preference falls in our table. So this is going to be a row relative frequency table question.
Hey, Miss Frisbee,
Yes.
I gotta leave.
Okay. Bye, Jordan.
Bye.
I am recording it so you can go back and watch it. Okay.
Okay.
So from this table, the row table, what percentage of them live in an urban setting? Okay. So out of the ones that prefer dogs from our row, which ones live in an urban setting? Okay. So urban dog, 77%. Okay. So far, both of those questions asked about urban dogs. Okay, but it's the way they asked them that showed us which table we have to use, right? All right, number 4. What percentage of people surveyed who live in an urban setting? All right, so this one specifically hones in on what? Urban setting, okay? So where is urban setting in our table?
Wouldn't that be the?
Okay, so in the table, urban is one of the columns. So we're going to find this answer from a column relative frequency table. Okay, so that was number 2. So from urban setting, how many prefer dogs? Urban, so we're looking at our column, urban prefer dogs, what percentage is that? 60%. Okay. Number 5. It says, how many of the people responded that they prefer dogs and live in an urban setting? Okay. So this one is a little bit trickier, but it says specifically how many. What did the other questions ask about? They all asked about percentages. So if it asks about a percentage, we know it's going to come from a relative frequency table. Does this question ask about a percentage? No. So what table are we going to have to use to find out how many of something? The two-way table. All right, so how many people responded that they prefer dogs and live in an urban setting? So we go back to our two-way table. Urban, dog, how many was that? 80 people. Not 80%, just 80 people. All right, next question. It says, among the people surveyed, are there more people who prefer dogs or cats? Okay, so once again, it's still talking about a preference. So that is going to be the percentages. So if we're talking about the total people surveyed, which table are we looking at? The overall. Are there more people who prefer dogs or cats? Okay, so we're going to look here. The overall, we have dogs and cats. How many total people like cats? What percentage? 48%. And then what about dogs? Sorry, 52%. Okay, so do more people prefer dogs or cats? They prefer dogs. All right, last question. It says your pet food company has access to a billboard in a rural setting. Would you recommend advertising dog food or cat food on this billboard? Which table do you use to make this decision? Explain. All right, so it's talking specifically about a rural setting. So what type of table are we going to use? We're going to use the column. Why? Okay, we're talking about urban and rural. Those are in a column. So this is our row. So we're not using that one. We're using the column one, which is number 2 here. Okay. Okay, so it wants to know, in a rural setting, they have a billboard. Should they advertise cat food or dog food? Why should they advertise cat food? Good. Okay, they should advertise cat food. I have to change colors. This is out. Because 64% of people prefer cats.
Okay, we are about to take National Honor Society, so if there's anyone in National Honor Society, please go to the gym at this time. Next will be Children's Volunteer Club, Drama Club, and Travel Club. So Children's Volunteer, Drama, and Travel. Go to the gym at this time. Thank you.
Okay, it says cat food because 64% of people prefer cats. It says, which table did you use to make this decision? Okay, which table did we use? we used the column relative frequency table, and it says explain. Why did we use that one?
Because it's talking about rural areas specifically and that small town model.
Because it was focused on rural setting. On a rural setting. All right. So you can see how now that we have those tables that are very honed in on specific preferences and whatnot, we can answer questions like this. Okay, you can see how a question like this is really important in a real world situation. Okay, if you're going to spend a bunch of money on something like a billboard, you're going to want to make sure it's getting to the right people to see it, right? Okay, so you can see how these are actually important. All right, next page, 2.3 says analyzing a study with 2 treatments. All right. So it says in an experiment to test the effectiveness on vitamin C on the length of colds, 2 groups of people with colds are given a pill to take once a day. The pill for one of the groups contains 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C, while the other group takes a placebo pill. Do y'all know what a placebo pill is? It's basically like a sugar pill. Okay, so some people who have, all these people have colds. So let's imagine this is our class. We're going to split you in half. Half of y'all are going to get medicine to help. Half of y'all are going to get a sugar pill. Okay, you don't know which one you get. Okay, and we're going to see if the vitamin C actually improves the cold or if it's like all in their head. Okay, so that's what this experiment is for. Okay, and we can all kind of relate to this with all this COVID stuff going on right now. I don't know if y'all's parents are making y'all take all kinds of vitamins and stuff. All right, so it says the researchers record the results in this table. Okay, so we have group A and B. We have colds that last less than a week and colds that last a week or more. Okay, all right. So we can see this table here. What do you notice about the numbers? They're not percentages. So what kind of table is this? This is my two-way table. Okay. So I know these are a lot of words, but bear with me. It says, first, the researchers want to know what percentage of people are in each combination of categories. 14% of all the participants had a cold that lasted less than a week and were in group A. What percentage right here in the middle of the paragraph? What percentage of all the participants? All of the participants had a cold that lasted less than a week and were in group B. Complete the rest of the relative frequency table with the corresponding percentages. Okay, so we want to know the percentages based off of all of the people that were in this experiment. So what type of relative frequency table is this going to be? Overall. Okay. So if we want to do an overall, we have to take the actual value and divide it by the total. I'm just writing that again, just so it's embedded in our brains. Okay, so they've done the first one for us. Okay, they got 14%. Okay, so they got 16. Where did they get that 16 from?
Colds that last less than a week from group A.
Okay, colds that lasted less than a week from group A, they got 16. Okay, so that's our actual value. All right, and then why did they take all these numbers and add them together? So they could get the total of people that were in this experiment. Okay, and so then they got 0.14. So what percentage is that? 14%.
That's weird how they had that like lined up.
All right, now we have group B. What is the actual value for group B and colds that lasted less than a week? 27. Okay, so we're going to put that in our numerator, 27. All right, and then I'm just going to go ahead and add this up. I'm not going to write all that out. 16 plus 27 plus 17 plus 53. So how many total people were in this experiment? 113. All right, so if 27 people out of the entire 113 were in this group, what percentage of people is that? How would I find it? I would divide those two numbers, 27 divided by 113, and I get this, wait 1 second, let me clear this so it's not so overwhelming. 27 divided by 113. Okay, I get this big long decimal. How am I going to find it? Move twice. Uh-oh, but there's an 8 here. What's that going to make this into? 24%. All right, now let's do group A and colds that last a week or more. How many actual people were in group A with a cold that lasted a week or more? 17 out of how many people? 113 total. So how am I going to find that percentage? I'm just going to divide them. 17 divided by 113. I get what percentage? 15. All right, last one, group B, a cold that lasted a week or more. How many actual people were there?
All right, next we will be taking the senior class photo and 12-year classmates. So if there are any seniors here that are not in the gym for the senior class photo, please go at this time. Following that, we will take the FCA picture, the quiz bowl pictures, and then art, interact, and cross country. So seniors, go to the gym. We will have FCA, quiz bowl, art, interact, cross country. Thank you.
All right, so what percentage of the people were in group B and had a cold that lasted a week or more? 47. Good. Awesome. So there are all of our percentages for that group. Okay, so now we'd be able to answer specific questions about them. Okay, let's look at the next one and see how it's worded to see what kind of table this is going to be. It says, next, the researchers noticed that among the participants who had colds that lasted less than a week, who had colds that lasted less than a week, 37% were in group A. Among participants who had a cold that lasted a week or more, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so now it's not among all the participants, it's specifically the ones who had colds that lasted less than a week. So what section of our table is that preference in? It's a row, okay? So what type of table will this be? It's gonna be a row relative frequency table. All right, and how do we find that? What's our little formula?
The actual value divided by the row value.
The actual value divided by the row total. Did they give us the row total in our original table?
No.
What would have been really helpful if we would have done it right at the start? We found all of our totals. So let's go back and do that real quick, just because we're going to need it here in a minute. All right, there are all my totals. Y'all want to double check yours with mine? Okay, back to my table. So for group A, for a cold that lasts less than a week, they've already done that one for us. They took the 16 from group A and a cold. And then why did they add 16 plus 27? That's going to give me the row total. Okay, so now let's go to group B. Let's do blue. All right, how many actual people were there in group B with a cold that lasted less than a week? There's 27 out of how many total people with a cold that lasted less than a week? 43. Okay, how are we going to find that percentage? We're going to divide it. 27 divided by 43. And then we get this. What percentage is that? 63%. Yeah, 63%. All right, next we have group A with a cold that lasted a week or more. How many actual people were there in that group with a cold that lasted a week or more? 17. Out of how many total people that had a cold that lasted a week or more? 70. Okay, because we have now moved to a new row. All right, how am I going to find that percentage? I'm going to divide. And what percentage is that? 24%. All right, last one. How many people were in that last group with a cold that lasted a week or more? 53 out of how many total people? 70. And 53 divided by 70 is what percentage of people? 76%.
I understand that row now.
Yeah, that's the one you missed. All right, I'm sure y'all can assume what that last one's gonna be, but let's do it anyways. Finally, the researchers noticed that among the participants in group A, 48 had colds that lasted less than a week. Among the participants, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so it wants to know among the participants specifically from groups A and groups B. Okay, so where are those specifically in our table? They're in our columns. Okay, so what type of table is this going to be? A column relative frequency table. All right, and what's my little formula for remembering how to do a column relative frequency table? The actual value divided by the column total. Awesome. What colors have I not used? Okay, so they have gone ahead and done the first one for us. We have group A with a cold that lasts less than a week. They used 16 because that's how many people were in that group. And then they did 16 plus 17. Why did they do 16 plus 17? That's going to be the column total. All right, so let's stay in this column. We have group A with a cold that lasted a week or more. How many people were in group A with a cold that lasted a week or more? 17. Out of how many total people? 33. All right, and what percentage of people is that? You're probably right. 0.515151, which rounds up to 52%. Good. Next, we have group B with a cold that lasts a week or more. How many people were there? There were 27. Out of how many total people in group B? Group B, there were 80. All right, how are we going to find that percentage? divide. 27 divided by 80 would be 34%. And then finally, how am I going to find that last group? How many people were in group B with a cold that lasted a week or more? Out of how many? Which is what percentage? Okay, so now that we've filled in all of that information, we can answer these two questions about it. Now, every single time you have relative frequency tables, it's not going to expect you to make all three of them and then answer questions about it. It's just going to give you a two-way table, and then it's going to ask you these questions about it, and you're going to have to know based off of how they ask the question, which type of table you have to create. Does that make sense? All right, so let's look at number 4. It says to understand the results, the researchers want to know, okay, here's where it's going to tell us which table we're looking at. Among the people whose cold lasted less than a week, what percentage are in group B? All right, so specifically, we want to know among the colds that lasted less than a week. So where does it talk about the colds in our table? Is that a row or a column? It's a row. So we're going to be looking at the row relative frequency table. Okay, so let's look at it. That's number 2. And it wants to know among the people who have colds that lasted less than a week, what percentage are in group B? Okay, so we're looking here. Colds that lasted less than a week. How many were in group B? 63%. All right, next, y'all are going to tell me the important thing to look at. So read it real quick. I'll read it, and then y'all decide which table we're going to use first. If the researchers believe that vitamin C has a small effect on the length of a cold, team timeout. Which group most likely got the pills containing vitamin C? Okay, what's the important part that tells us which table we're going to use? Which group? Where does it talk about the groups? In a column. All right. Now, there's not necessarily a correct answer on this. This is kind of open for interpretation, but let's look at it. So we're going to look at the column relative frequency table. That's this one up here. We're looking at the groups. So we have to think about it. If they receive the vitamin C, that's the medicine, would their cold be shorter or longer? They receive the medicine. It should be shorter, okay? And then the other groups should be longer, okay? So looking at this one right here, if the researchers believe that vitamin C has a small effect on the length of a cold, which group most likely got the pills containing vitamin C? Here's the colds that lasted less than a week. Which group had more that were shorter? Group A. Which group had more that were longer? Group B. Okay. So if we look specifically at the numbers, it looks like maybe group A had them, but they're also very close together. So could it be either one? And maybe vitamin C doesn't have an effect? Yeah, that could also be true. Okay. Now, that's why I was saying it's kind of open for your interpretation. So on one hand, you could say it looks like group A had vitamin C because they had a larger percentage of people that had their cold shorter was a shorter length of time, and they had a smaller number whose colds were a longer length of time. Okay, or on the other hand, you could say they're all pretty close and we can't really make a decision. Okay, so you can write whatever you think. How many people think group A had the vitamin C? Okay, so write that down. I think group A had the vitamin C. How many of y'all think it's too close to make a decision? Write that down. All the percentages are too close to make a decision. Okay, so you can see how this is actually something important. These are probably things that doctors are all doing right now for this COVID vaccine. Okay, they're testing all these different experiments with different medicines to see what's actually helping and what's actually not doing anything. All right. Moving on to the lesson summary. I do not know what page 20. Okay. It says converting two-way tables to relative frequency tables can help reveal patterns in paired categorical categories. Highlight. Relative frequency tables are created by dividing the value in each cell in a two-way table by the total responses in the entire table, in a row, or in a column. Okay, those are our three types of tables we know. Okay, our first example is right here. We have this two-way table that they've given us. It shows new and used textbooks and their price. All right, so here is a two-way relative frequency table is created. And they do that. It says this two-way relative frequency table allows you to see what proportion of the total is represented by each number. So because it's of the total, what type of relative frequency table is it? Since it's based on the total amount of people, total amount of books overall. All right, next section, it starts with in other situations. In other situations, it makes sense to examine rows or column proportions in a relative frequency table. Okay. It says, for example, to convert an original two-way table to a column relative frequency table, using column proportions, divide each value by the sum of the column. So this one is a column. Hey, what do you want? Wait, are you going?
Yeah, Sour Patch.
No, I'll text it to you.
Okay.
And then I'll text you what Former wants to.
Okay.
Don't tell her you're going. Did you already tell her?
Yeah, but she doesn't know we're getting her anything. Okay. Thank you, friend. You're welcome. That's it. That's all you need?
Yes, ma'am. And I'll cash app you.
Okay.
Is Lulu out there?
She's actually pulling around, so we're actually gonna go out that door.
Oh, will you tell her? Will you give her that for the drinks the other day?
Yes. Oh, you just rolled up and then it's like, hold on. I got broke. Oh my God.
All right, so yeah, that's the end of that lesson. Really quickly, you do need to get your Chromebooks out. We are gonna practice one on our own like we did in lesson 1. Okay, so go to your Google Classroom. I've got to post it real quick so people at home, just give me 1 second. I'll check. I can't remember. I think I might.
Yeah, our computer is interesting. Hey, do you have a Chromebook charger?
Yeah, what
Can
kind?
I borrow it? The small one?
All right, you should be able to check your Google Classrooms now. They should be on there at the very top of your thing. Yeah, lesson 2, cool down, click on it.